Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Lambert Mbom, and welcome to yet another edition of the Lambom Show. Again, a continuation of our series on COVID-19, and today we'll have a third conversation about vaccines within the context of the recent announcement of the vaccines that have been discovered, tested, and are ready to be distributed. We're in the last month of the year 2020, and it is ending like it started: confusion. The global health of the world is in shock, consternation, and confusion. The COVID-19 pandemic has been the story of the year and has all the marks of a true story. COVID-19 has brought out the best and, of course, the worst. In the United States, it has been a mixture of politics and science, and many people have learned to question basic assumptions. A few weeks ago, we got the breaking news that a vaccine has been successfully tried and ready for approval. And after one, we got two, and then three. And of course, throughout this period, we have learned that in the context of public health, in the context of medicine, it is important. In fact, not just important, the most relevant thing to do is to believe in the scientists, to believe in the researchers, to believe in those who have been engaged in this search for a vaccine. And that is what this program is out to do today. We are about to test, the assumptions of the scientists. I am privileged, I am honored, I am glad that today on this show, I have with me, and for the sake of let me be clear about this. I have to make sure that everybody understands where I'm going to with this. I have two of my classmates in Sacred Heart College. Went to Sacred Heart College in 1984. They are medical doctors. One is based in Germany, the other is based in the United States. We would not be able to have a third because it's in South Africa. I don't know what happened, but I'm hoping and still praying that somehow some magic would happen and Dr. Obidike Fidelis would join us. So, like I said, these are medical doctors, and they have been following up the developments. And I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to have a discussion. We are going to have, some sort of update where we are. I'd like to welcome Dr. Chi-Kekah Senge. I know their name goes in a certain order, but I prefer to use the order that I love. Dr. Chi, welcome.
We're going to have some very, very productive discussions today. So thanks once again.
And also on set with us from Germany, we have Dr. Ivo Azeh. He's based in Germany. And again, I was supposed to really introduce you like normal, but I'll let you guys introduce yourselves for the sake of the audience so that they understand where you are coming from. I know, we all know where you all are based, isn't it? So, Dr. Ivo, let's start off with you. Just introduce yourself, what you have been doing, what work, because you have been a medical doctor 20 years or more, currently engaged in some form of oncology. I also just discovered internal medicine and a whole wide range of things. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about the work you do, Dr. Ivo.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Mr. Lambert, for inviting me to your show and to talk about pressing issues. And dear members in the audience, we're happy that you're there, and we're looking forward to a very constructive discussion. And it's just more than just a show. These are pertinent things that are affecting mankind today. So we hope to shed light on certain things and to answer your questions. So we are happy to have you there. And also my colleague and friend, Dr. Chi-Kekah, we have been sharing a lot together and even in our studies together, and we're looking forward to share our knowledge also. So for my personality, actually, I am practicing in Gelsenkirchen. I am an oncologist, hematologist and oncologist, and I did a specialization in infectiology. So my clinical day is treating patients with cancer. But prior to my specialization in cancer and internal medicine, I did research at the University of Göttingen in developing vaccine for streptococcal infections in rabbit models, and we tried to develop conjugate vaccines, and so I have some knowledge about that. After that, I then specialized in infectiology before moving to oncology. So thank you, and I'm here from Cameroon. I was born in Quen and studied in Sacred Heart College, and then moved to Germany after advanced level or high school. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ivo. Let me bring on Dr. Chi-Kekah. Let's hear how about you.
Yeah, thank you, Lambert. Thanks, Ivo. Lambert and I, we go a very, very long way backwards, all the way from primary school, not necessarily from Sacred Heart College, Mancon. I think we've known each other for almost 40 years. So essentially, after high school in Mancon, Sacred Heart College, Mancon, I went to Germany, where I studied at the University of Heidelberg. And after studying there, I worked in internal medicine for a couple of years, then came over here and did a lot of work in research, primarily metabolic research and obesity at the Center for Surgical Treatment of Obesity, headed at the time by Dr. Ma Fobi, who is a surgeon. And then I went to the University of Loma Linda here in California, did a lot of work there within the auspices of postgraduate medical education, specializing more or less in preventive medicine within the auspices of internal medicine. And I have been active in that field of research from an internal medicine perspective, and I am currently a senior vice president at the Advanced Research Center in Anaheim by Disney. I am so much looking forward to what we're going to be talking about today. It's the test of the times. It's a pandemic, and it's evolving very rapidly. So there's need for science-based knowledge to guide us at this very, very difficult time. So I'm so much looking forward to what we're going to talk about today, and I hope we're going to take some value out of it. So once again, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, doctors, and I really want to appreciate the time, because I know that you all would have been engaged in some other very, I don't want to say more useful, but you offered the time to come and spend with me here. I want to welcome my friend Franco Bongam, Grade 1 Lambert, Divine Chamukong, my brother. Thank you, Lambert, for bringing up the topic. We didn't see God love. Mr. Lambert, good to see you. You taught me in secondary school. So again, those are a few comments that are coming in. But so like I said, we are going to be sharing a lot, isn't it? I don't want it to be controversial, even though we may end up being, we are not afraid of controversies, isn't it? We are not afraid of that. And we want to get into the academics. Let's start off from the beginning, because very often when people talk about vaccines, they are just saying vaccines because somebody said something about it. What is a vaccine? And what types of vaccines are there before we get into the other stuff? Dr. Chi, want to start off?
Yeah, essentially a vaccine is a substance, it's a chemical substance which you can use to induce a specific reaction, immune reaction from your body. More or less, you are trying to train your body to mount a defense against a specific foreign substance which might invade your body and cause a disease. So in layman terms, I would want to describe a vaccine by saying you have a security guard in your property, and you have security guards in your property, and you are training those security guards against a specific type of invasion, and so that if that invasion actually takes place, that security guard is going to mount a very, very targeted and specific response to neutralize that invasion. So more or less, let's say a vaccine is training your immune system to mount a very, very complete, robust, and effective defense against an invasive agent.
So, Dr. Ivo, you want to add anything to that?
Maybe on the second part on the types of vaccine. Well, generally, if we use normal terms, it's like, okay, if a foreign agent is get introduced into your system, you can use the example of the military to say that, you know, when you're at war, the different the different groups or the enemies, they have a different uniform. So your body could, like, or you yourself, you could identify the enemy with his uniform or the coat. So what we do in vaccines is like try to produce the coat, and that is a protein that is introduced into the body to stimulate the immune system so that it generates a memory to recognize that when it comes in again. So the traditional vaccine production was you could use the attenuated or inactivated virus or bacteria. You inject it into the person, he recognizes, the immune system recognizes this as a foreign substance. At that time, inactivated virus or bacteria cannot cause infection, but then the immune system stores the memory. So this process of vaccine production with the protein coat or attenuated viruses, it's really intensive and it needs a lot of purification. So the next step and what we are getting now in biotechnology, which is really an improvement, is, okay, how can we develop this protein coat in a faster means? So now we are getting new technology, the or messenger RNA that just gets the information about the protein into your cell, and your cell produces this coating protein, you know. So it's a faster system that is just introducing the types of vaccines. So you have attenuated live viruses that you can use to vaccinate someone. You have inactive viruses that you can use to vaccinate somebody. You can just get just a protein coat, just part of the protein coat, and you inject it into the person, and the immune system recognizes that. So the next level in technology was not getting this protein coat from the virus or bacteria itself. It was getting this protein coat by using recombinant technology. You just produce that protein. So we are now at the next level where we are not producing the protein, but we are sending the information into the cells of humans that was tested in animals, and then they produce this protein. So it's a faster system, and it's groundbreaking in biotechnology.
So, Doc, sorry to before you get into that, because again, that's one aspect of this whole vaccine thing that is interesting. I mean, when you talk about proteins, I'm thinking about when we're growing up, we're told that the balanced meal included some. When you start talking about proteins being injected, and is it that when I eat so much beans, that's protein, or what? I mean, so what I'm in essence asking is, what is the protein? Because it seems as if vaccinology has to do with protein, if I'm right. And what does that, I mean, how is that different from the food when you talk about eating a balanced diet and having proteins before you get into the next level, because you have talked about biotechnology? What is that even?
Well, maybe it's not always a protein. It could be a lipopolysaccharide. It can be a polysaccharide. You know, these are sugar. Where I'm trying to just transfer the information of the codes. So, as I said, a uniform. So the kind of the uniform that an army is wearing at war on the different fractions, a bacteria has or a virus, they have a coat, you know, they have a coat that is surrounding their material, and it could be a protein coat, it could be a protein coat, it could be a polysaccharide, these are sugar molecules. It can also be a lipid, you know, fat. So it's not always a protein. So just to correct that. But we're trying to develop what the immune system recognizes. So if you look into the military, also it's at war. What is the uniform of the enemy? So it's not always a protein, you know. So and a foreign protein is recognized by the immune system as foreign. A foreign polysaccharide or sugar molecules or lipopolysaccharide, which is with fat and sugar, or a combination of all of this, the immune system can recognize it as being foreign. But what we eat, you know, those are not recognized as foreign substances. Those are substances that the body recognizes. So if sugar gets into the body, the immune system knows that, okay, this is a substance that I need. It is acquainted with that, you know.
So, Dr. Chi, now we have talked about a series of them. This is not the first vaccine that we are talking about, isn't it? There's been a history, and just Dr. Ivo mentioned different stages. So, generally, there have always been vaccines. But now there's a second level of the biotechnology introducing something new. And it described something about mRNA vaccine. I think that's a recent one that we are dealing with. What was all that jargon about?
Yeah, so you see, you have essentially, you can create vaccines in a couple of ways. You can use, as Dr. Azeh mentioned before, you can use parts of the invasive pathogen to create a vaccine. You can use some of the products produced by the invasive pathogen to create a vaccine. And one other way is to use synthetic compounds, which are synthetic components of the invasive pathogen to create a vaccine. And he talked about the mRNA, which is part of the Pfizer, which is the way the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines have been created. These are synthetic genetic components of the virus, and well, they have been purified. And what happens when you use those ones is that the cells of your body are going to produce the viral protein when you inject this into your body, and your body is going to recognize the viral proteins as foreign elements. And when they recognize the viral proteins as foreign elements, they are going to mount an immune response. This immune response is what is going to be presented in your body in the form of antibodies, so that when you come across that invasive pathogen, now your body has already been trained to recognize it, and it's going to mount an effective response, which within the context of medicine, we are going to say it's your protection against that specific, once again, that specific pathogen. So it's something which has never been done before. It's a very, very new avenue for intervention. And of course, people don't think, and there are a lot of questions about that.
Yeah. Okay, before we come to the questions, you had something to say, Dr. Azeh?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add on what Dr. Chi said, you know, from the traditional vaccine technology that has been used before to current, that the technology, of course, it is old and it needs a lot of time. And generally, we needed about 4 years to develop a vaccine. and now we were able to, or the scientists were able to develop a vaccine within 8 months. So the thing with the technology is now that we are in an information-based society. So the RNA is the information needed to generate the protein. So the current platforms that we use, producing proteins and inactivating viruses, it is really tedious. We know that the vaccines are relatively safe, but to produce them, it really took a lot of time. So now we have a platform that you just send in the information, and then it produces the RNA, which codes the protein. So you can use this platform for actually any other kind of vaccine development, and it goes really very fast. So the other level now that I wanted to add is the DNA level. So the DNA is really the basic information of all the substances and processes in an organic system that is stored into the nucleus. So we have from the Oxford and AstraZeneca, they are developing a DNA type of virus, and it's also a DNA type of vaccine, and it's a vaccine that has actually never been approved in humans and used in humans also. So we are also having this vaccine, and the DNA is actually introduced into the nucleus, and then it is encoded into an RNA, and the RNA moves back into the cell cytoplasm for the development of the proteins, of the virus. So it's also a technology that is relatively new, and we still have some open questions about the long-term safety. So currently, at the moment on COVID, we have two kinds of vaccines that are advanced, that are in stage 3 development, and one has been approved. So we have the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine that Dr. Senge talked about, and that is BNT 162b2, has been approved in the UK for use. And it is important to note that this vaccine was tested in adults from the age of 16, and the virus has been approved from that age. And it is also not recommended for pregnant women. So we also have issues with pregnancy and use of the vaccine for people who want to become pregnant. And it is not very clear if this vaccine is actually stopping the infection. It stops or prevents disease, but the transmission of infection is not stopped. So I just wanted to clarify on that, and why the AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine, which is a DNA vaccine, which is also in an advanced state, it is actually from the preliminary data, it is effective, but also we don't have long-term data if this DNA will be incorporated in the nucleus. So just a brief introduction of the two vaccines that actually we are maybe talking about.
So two things that I've learned this far. Number one, and I like the analogy that both of you have used. Dr. Chi talked about a vaccine as a guard, having a guard, and you moved beyond just having a guard to kind of a military term, isn't it? So both of it is all in terms of defense. That's the first thing. A vaccine is a defense that you build up in the system prior to something, so that once you are attacked, the defense is able, because that defense now has a memory. It's like injecting a memory card. And once the memory card comes into contact with something that it recognizes, it can fight it off. That's very important, a defense system. And the second thing that I learned is that we have currently two types, which is what I want us to really just focus on a little bit. You talked about a DNA, and then after the DNA, you say that will be injected into the RNA. And then we have a second type, which is a mRNA. So those are two types of vaccines. And I know that there's a lot of talk about the DNA. Just explain for us, Dr. Ivo, what is a DNA and what is a RNA? I know you have talked about technology, so it's just a platform where things are being injected into, for the sake of the audience.
So DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is an information system that has since biologic existence is occurring on the earth, that is used to store the basic information of the substances and the processes within an organism. So all this information, how a protein is built, how a glucose molecule, how all the other processes in the system is stored in the DNA. So we remember maybe those in school, Crick and Watson, that discovered how this DNA molecule looks like and how it is stored in a compact system in our nucleus. So the nucleus, that is the central organism of all living organism, is where the information is stored as a DNA. So at every time that something has to be made, maybe just like in any other house, you store your data. Even with computers today, you store your data somewhere, and when you need this information, you go and retrieve it there. So at every time that something has to be constructed in the body, like a protein, this information within the DNA has to be transformed and carried into the cytoplasm for the development of that block, for example. So let's say you want to build something, a protein, maybe like a house. So you need the plan, you need the information on how to build that. So the DNA is transformed, or it is read and carried as a messenger RNA. So a messenger RNA is just what is carrying the information from the nucleus into the cytoplasm where they are doing the building. So you go and get the plan of what you have to do from the cell nucleus. This information is transformed into a messenger RNA, and this messenger RNA is carried now at the construction site, which is the cytoplasm, and then they read it, and then they know, okay, these are the various amino acids that we need, one after the other, in the correct raster information on how to build that protein. I hope I've simplified that enough.
So, Dr. Senge, what do you have to add about DNA, RNA, mRNA, all that stuff? It sounds so technical.
Yes, it is indeed technical. Very, very difficult to break it down. As Ivo said, the mRNA is just the messenger. It's taking the information from the nucleus, which is where you have the DNA. It's taking the information from the nucleus to the cytoplasm. And the buildup of protein, the synthesis of protein actually takes place in that area in the cytoplasm. So the messenger RNA is a messenger. It just transfers the information from the genetic code, which is in the DNA, to the site where the actual building of the proteins takes place, which is in the cytoplasm. Very difficult to break it further down, but let's just say the mRNA is like the messenger. In those olden days, we used to have messengers who takes the information from the source and to the construction site. That's it. And I don't know how further I can break it down, but the messenger RNA is just a messenger taking the information from the source, right, to where the actual work takes place.
So let me try something else. So when somebody is infected,
yes,
where does the infection take place? So, for example, you are an oncologist, Dr. Azeh. If somebody has cancer, the cancer is affecting cells. And so one way of dealing with the cells is to look at the DNA of the person, and maybe are you able to treat the cells, or are you able to scrape them off and get a new DNA? I don't know whether that explains where I'm getting to with this. So what is it about
to simplify, where you're not far from that, but cancer is also a genetic disorder. So on the whole,
did we lose you?
Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that cancer is also a genetic disorder, and it's a disorder that has to do with the proliferation of cells. So you have a disorder where the control of the proliferation, that is the growth of cells, is being controlled. So when this control mechanism is distorted, the cells then just proliferate and they live longer. So those are one of the hallmarks. And most of the time, it has to do with a damage in the DNA area of the cells that controls of what controls their growth. So it's unlike an infection. So in cancer, you also have your immune system that controls the cancer cells. So when your immune system is too weak, it cannot eradicate the cancer cells that are malignant. you know that's just like a brief description. Where in infections you have a foreign substance invading the body, and then like a virus gets into the cells and then they take control. They hijack. A virus actually hijacks your cell system and introduces its own information. It can be an RNA or it can be a DNA, and these cells are then actually ordered to be producing and doing what the virus wants.
Good. So again, there are two kinds, and we'll come back to that. For those who are just joining us, again, Franco says the premium value you bring with these shows cannot be evaluated in terms of money. Event at the stock market. Lambert, kudos. And our friend and classmate all the way in South Africa, Emmanuel Ngamale, it is a great and timely as the vaccines are appearing in record time. First, can our doctors tell us why Africa as a continent seems to be resisting the COVID-19 virus, or this assumption is erroneous? I think let's keep that, and we'll come to that after we get to some other stuff. Yes. He also says, please debunk conspiracies around the new vaccines and surveillance. Of course, Boston is in the house. Edward, what are the pros and cons of introducing this COVID-19 vaccine into African nations, which have not been so severely impacted by the virus as the US and Europe? So again, before we get into those questions, I think it's important for us to understand a few things. Let's get further down in terms of the vaccine. I know everybody's interested in knowing, are these vaccines safe? Because we have just talked about the issue of DNA. One of the greatest conspiracies that has come up is once you take this vaccine, it's going to change your entire DNA. Okay, so you have the DNA of if it's a chimpanzee or whatever. I mean, in one of the messages I heard, is that true?
Okay, maybe if I start, before we go into the safety, first of all, it is important to say that the current technology that we have is really groundbreaking. It is we are doing genetic engineering and genetic farming. So we are at another level, of using biotechnology in doing things. So it is great, it is a great technology, and it's an evolution on medicine, on genomic medicine. And even in cancer, we see that a lot of things is going there on how to use genomic information and genetic engineering to fight against diseases and cancer. But of course, as we said, we are dealing with a new technology, and for the first time in mankind, we are having this new kind of vaccine. And because of the situation of the pandemic when it started, everything was accelerated. We talk normally in developing any medical product, you undergo 3 phases: phase 1, 2, and 3, and it took years to get that information down. So at the moment, most of the vaccines were developed, they use the telescoping technology. So actually, most of the 3 kinds of phases, they were actually put together. Phase 1, 2, and 3 were running parallel. So we have some problems of safety there now, because of course there was pressure on time to develop that. But of course we should not risk with time and risk humans who are actually healthy. So we're having a new technology, we are having a new kind of vaccine. We don't have any long-term data on the safety. Of course, if you look at the mRNA vaccine, I think the groundbreaking study was done in Germany. That was already 3 years ago when they were trying to develop a mRNA vaccine for rabies, but it never reached the level of producing a rabies vaccine. Of course, maybe if you look at it internationally, rabies is a disease that does not affect the Western world that much, only the exposed population, farmers and people working in the forests and veterinarians. So there was not a real genuine interest to develop that vaccine also in the fast mode, but we had some preliminary data on that. So this data was now used, or the platform and technology was now used, because it's faster to develop the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine and also the Moderna vaccine that has actually reached phase 3 and are being approved for usage. But of course, we don't have long-term data on this. So we are not really clear what happens. If you look at the information on the BioNTech and Pfizer vaccine, we have normal short-term after inoculation side effects like chills, fever, pain. Those are things that develop. But the vaccine, as I said before, was tested on people above the age of 16. So we don't yet know how children will react to that. We have situations where in pregnancy, we don't know what happens to the mRNA in an area where an embryo has to develop. So I believe that those are really pertinent issues. And of course, if we're talking about safety, we have to always look at the risk and benefit analysis. So who is at risk and how much does it benefit from the vaccine? And those that are not at risk, if we are having safety issue on long-term issue, are we ready to sacrifice that just for the vaccine for people who might get the infection and don't really develop any proud symptoms? Yeah.
So, because I know your stand, I did not want to review that. Just take this question before we get on. This is Divine Chamukong. He's a journalist based in Washington, D.C. He runs a weekly show, Chat Night Africa. He's asking, the doctor said the vaccine not recommended for pregnant women or women intending to be pregnant. How about men intending to impregnate women?
Well, it's similar. It's, of course, the situation where the embryo is developing in the women. So the recommendation is, if you're planning to get pregnant within 2 months after vaccination, you should consider not taking the vaccine. So that's the official recommendation. But the fact is that we don't know that. So that's the situation. So there are a lot of open questions. And it is important also in the whole scenario when we're talking about things. The thing that affects COVID is not how do we deal with what we know? And a lot of things in life is how do we deal with what we don't know? How do we deal with uncertainty? And it is something that we should actually practice in medicine and in making public decisions. How do we deal with uncertainty and things we don't know, and to be on the safe side?
So, because we have gotten to this stage, let me get to where we really want to be. Dr. Azeh, do you believe in vaccines?
Of course, I have my vaccination card with me, and I've been going through most of the vaccines that is needed. I practice as a physician. I did my influenza vaccine also 2 months ago, because I do that yearly, because I think also that we in the medical sector, we are vectors. But those are vaccines. So for me personally, I always analyze the risks and benefits. So I do certain vaccines for my own personal protection, and I do certain vaccines for the protection of people I contact, because I'm a vector. But also looking at the current situation and the case fatality of COVID, I'm asking myself.
You are preempting my next question. Hang on, I'm coming to you. Just hang on. So, Dr. Chi, over to you.
Yes.
Do you believe in vaccines?
Yes, of course. I believe in vaccines. I think are a very, very essential aspect of population medicine. Vaccines have done wonders for mankind. So I totally and absolutely believe in vaccines.
So then the question becomes, for the sake of everybody, Dr. Azeh, are you going to take the COVID-19 vaccine?
Yeah, so if you are doing a vaccination, there are two questions you are asking. And these are questions that are normally not revealed in public. The first is what is the aim of the vaccine? Is the aim of the vaccine to reduce infection, transmission, or is the aim of the vaccine to reduce the degree of illnesses or the intensity of illness and mortality and prevent mortality? So if personally I take vaccines because I'm a vector, so I take vaccines that prevent transmission as a physician. So for my own personal health also, I take vaccines that I think are necessary to that prevent me from severe illnesses. You take like meningitis when you travel to Africa, or yellow fever. Those are severe illnesses. So at the current stage, we are having vaccines that we don't know what they are what they aim for. So if we look at the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, all we know that the vaccine is efficacious in preventing illnesses. It is not, we don't know if it prevents transmission from one person to the other.
Yeah, but look, is it not obvious if you are? I mean, the example you started off with, isn't it? The thing about the defense, if it's able to prevent you, once you yourself, I mean, the infection, would that not also mean that automatically, if you are prevented, you will be able to prevent the transmitting to others?
No. You
Okay.
can, yeah. So vaccines sometimes prevent the severity of the illness and fatality, but the virus or the bacteria can still actually it can infect your mucosa. It can actually it can grow there. It can replicate, and it could be transmitted to somebody. But your immune system is actually in the level of preventing you getting very sick. And also, that's one of the problems of this vaccine, because we know that if we use the mucosa, it means your mucus, like in your lungs and in your nose, you can develop mucosal antibodies that is being injected into your nose, or you take it orally. So those vaccines actually develop different kind of immune response and sometimes prevent infections also. So at this level, we don't actually know if the intramuscular injections of this mRNA prevents you from getting the virus. The virus replicates on your mucosa, and then it is being transmitted to somebody. And it's very tricky. This issue is not being talked about, and that's the problem we're having. So we have a virus that actually 80-90% of the people actually do not have severe symptoms, but we have a risk population that gets sick, and they have issues of intensive care and fatality. And those are those that we want to protect. So if we're doing a vaccination and we are not sure of stopping this transmission, so the vaccine is not effective, actually. It's effective in those are risks from getting very sick, but the virus is within the society and is being transmitted. And at the moment, it's very important that we look in how to stop the transmission of the virus. So those are also one of the issues that I'm having with the current data on the current vaccine. Hello?
It looks like he might have locked off, but he will be coming up soon. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
We thought we lost you.
Yeah. I talk too much.
No. Go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I can hear you, but we have that.
Yeah. So again, Dr. Senge, let me come over to you now. I asked the same question. Are you going to take the COVID-19 vaccine, and why?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you say that again? Are you talking to me?
Yes. Can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Now, so the same question that I asked Dr. Azeh, I'm asking you, are you going to take the COVID-19 vaccine and why?
Yes, of course, I'm going to take the COVID-19 vaccine. I look at it from a population medicine perspective, in the sense that when you look at the data, or based on the data that has been presented so far, if you want to achieve herd immunity, right? Meaning that if you want a significant proportion of the population to have immunity against the virus, the vaccine is one of the ways to do it. And based on some of the results we've seen from the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and from the Moderna vaccine, if it does what it purports to do, right, then, and a significant proportion of the population were to get it, I see it as one of the methods to effectively reach herd immunity. And if you reach herd immunity, then you are preventing the spread of the vaccine. Sorry, of the virus. I'm sorry. So I'm going.
That's where our opinions differ, because
Right.
we are not sure if we're actually stopping transmission. So achieving herd immunity it's a goal, but I don't think we are there yet. And those are the things that were too fast, for this fast track development of the vaccine. So I don't think it's very clear if we are going to achieve herd immunity.
Yeah.
So again, go ahead, Dr. Chi. No, I think Dr. Azeh was rebutting your point about herd immunity. That is why you want to take the vaccine, because you want us to get to herd immunity. And for the sake of the audience, it will be important to clarify what herd immunity is. And Dr. Azeh is saying that he's not sure that we are going to attain the level of herd immunity.
Yes. Herd immunity is when a significant proportion of the population has immunity against a particular pathogen. I, unlike Dr. Azeh, is totally convinced that the vaccine will prevent a significant proportion of every individual who gets the vaccine. So if a significant proportion of the population were to get the vaccine, we will achieve herd immunity through that mechanism. Dr. Ivo believes that there is still going to be some residual virus in the mucosal membranes of people, even with the who have had the vaccine. I, for one, I'm not so sure if a specific testing has been done on those who have done the vaccinations to see if they still have some residual amount of the virus in the mucosal membranes. I will need to see data about that. But without that specific data, I think the vaccine is effective in getting us toward that goal of herd immunity.
So, Dr. Azeh, let me put this in context so that we are on the same page in terms of this. You are going to take the vaccine because you consider yourself a vector. You want to prevent others, isn't it? You have already mentioned something about risk analysis. You shared a paper on our forum. It's peer reviewed, isn't it? And you talked about the risk of COVID and all that. Dr. Chi-Kekah is saying that basically on the same point, isn't it? He is also going to take it so that we can get the herd immunity. Okay, once we get that herd immunity, after all, it's not 100% safe. So, of course, you're going to always have a few people. And to me, the question is basic. There are people who have had COVID. I mean, they treated themselves somehow. I hope not with hydroxychloroquine, but then they have been reinfected. Okay, so the question is, even with the head, and this is where I maybe differ with Dr. Chi. So even with the vaccination, even when people get the vaccine, is there a possibility of getting reinfected? Which is what I think you are pointing to, Dr. Azeh. Am I wrong?
Well, before I get to that point, one thing I want to clarify, we have two types of vaccine at the moment, but there are different types of vaccine being manufactured. So we still have vaccines that are being produced on the traditional platforms with attenuated viruses. We still have vaccines that are being produced with recombinant protein. And those are the traditional types of vaccines that we use, and we have data on the long-term safety. I am waiting for this type of vaccines to take them. So for me, I still have personal reservations for mRNA vaccines and DNA vaccines because of the long-term issues. And I'm saying
So
that because
you're waiting on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine that is still in trial. Is that the one you're talking about?
that's one of them. There are more companies. The Chinese also. There are more companies producing the traditional form of vaccines. So I believe that for young people, we have some time. We don't have to rush. So if we look at the risk and benefit analysis, as I always say, those that are risk, the old people and people with a lot of illnesses, they need to be vaccinated. They can get the mRNA vaccine because they need to be protected. But for people below 70, and if we go on to the study that was published by that you mentioned by WHO, by Ioannidis from Stanford University, the case fatality is 0.05 from people below 70. So these people are actually, they need, for this population, we need to vaccinate them to stop transmission. The goal is not to prevent illness because the illness is low and the fatality is actually low, but we don't have that data. So we are risking this population with a virus with with issues about long-term safety. And we have the traditional platform, and these viruses are being produced, and we can wait for that. So those are the type of vaccine that I would take. So I just wanted to clarify on that. Yeah.
Okay, so let me, Geraldine Mulu, my issue with this COVID vaccine is the speed at which it was produced. That's something we have actually referenced here. I also ask why there hasn't been a successful vaccine for malaria, given the number of people that have died in the third world nations. But the COVID-19 vaccine is available after 8 months of the pandemic. I don't get it, and no one seems to know the answers. Guys?
Yeah, let me take a shot. That's a very good question. That's indeed a very good question. So the speed, I think a little bit Dr. Azeh talked about it, based on the mechanism through which this vaccine was created. I'm talking about the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccines. They are messenger RNA vaccines. So it's a faster process from the technological aspect of it. It's faster to do, and that would explain an aspect of the speed with which it was done. Talking about malaria, it becomes kind of like a geopolitical kind of like issue. I don't have an answer for that. But coming back to the coronavirus, I would say that I think the nature of the disease and the speed with which it deals with those who end up dying from it, I look at it like something which is more than acute. It's more than kind of like fulminant. It's dramatic. And, we are all emotional beings, right? And things which affect people in such a way, it spurs a reaction. So essentially, I don't have an answer for that. I'm not part of the process creating the vaccines. But if I were to take a shot at answering that question, I would say primarily the methodology through which the vaccine was created is it's a very, very simple methodology to do it. It can provide an answer to the speed with which the vaccine was created. The other aspect of that question is kind of like very, very political and geopolitical. But I think some of the information that we are going to get from this coronavirus vaccine, if the long-term safety data comes out and it turns out that it's good, it could serve as a platform, it could serve as a basis or a foundation to research and come up with methods for other conditions such as malaria or maybe even HIV. So I don't have a full answer to that question, but once again, I think the technology in creating the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is a very, very simple one, which can provide answers to the speed. I
appreciate your candor, because on the one hand, even though you know that it has taken a shorter time, you understand the politics involved, you are still ready to go take the vaccine in order for us to have the herd immunity. Dr. Azeh?
Yeah, that's a really very interesting question, and it brings us to the economics of health. And the issue, as Dr. Senge said, I mean, the technology is fast, that's good. The clinical trials were too fast, and that telescoping is perhaps not really the best solution. Because at the beginning of the pandemic, I can understand we were like a bit scarce, but now we have some clinical information. We know those who are at risk. We know how to manage them in intensive care units. But the key issue is that drug development and vaccine development is a economic benefit related issue. It doesn't actually have a lot to do with needs most of the time. So vaccines nowadays are being developed actually only for countries which have a reimbursement issue or an insurance system. And we notice here that actually countries ordered vaccines that were not actually available. So you can understand the pressure. And if you have a system that is actually driven by personal benefits, the guys that actually created BioNTech had just been catapulted to one of the richest persons in Germany. Of course, I mean, he's a smart guy, he's intelligent, and he did a lot of work. I mean, it is great, and I admire him. But you look at how the economic of medicine is. If African countries were the one that ordered this vaccine, we wouldn't have had a vaccine nowadays, you know. So so to answer the question, if countries actually sat together and prepared a budget and say, this is the budget we want to order, we are ordering 300 million doses of malaria vaccine. I tell you, also next year we'll have a malaria vaccine, perhaps. So that's the difference. You know, that's the difference. Even as I said before, the mRNA technology was developed for vaccination against rabies. And actually, we don't have a rabies vaccine because the rabies is not an issue in developed countries where they have a reimbursement strategy. So most of the time, when these companies are developing a medical product, when they are developing drugs for cancer, most of the issues that are affecting countries in the West, they look at the reimbursement policy. As long as they are sure and they are targeting, they actually count the number of persons that might need that medication in the European Union, in US, and then they look and say, if FDA approves this and the EMA in Europe approves that, so we have access to this and this, so we cover our costs. It is also clear that vaccine development is really very expensive. I mean, that's very clear, and people are putting in their personal. These are companies that are on the stock market, you know, so they're investors and they want benefits for their money. And that's what is driving the production. So sometimes I believe that with this reimbursement policy and the personal benefits behind, things rush too fast, and we're having some medication and medical products within the system that are actually not really beneficial, but because they have been approved, and when they're approved, the reimbursement policy just covers them, and then they just go into the system.
So let me make sure that I'm hearing both of you correctly, because so Dr. Azeh, what you're saying is if you guys decided to, look for some money and invest it in some technology, and this technology was there, they started off with rabies, and because there was no market for it, it did not pick up. And so when COVID came, they now said, oh, this is a place where we think. And then there were countries that have already ordered the vaccine before the vaccine was actually even tried. And because of that economic value, that is why it has taken 8 months. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we are all humans, and we have our families to feed. We want to invest our money, and we want to have a better return on our investment. So that also affects the market at certain time, and there are conflicts of interest there. It's legitimate.
Yes.
So again, you were a little mild in talking about the geopolitics of it. So, and maybe Dr. Azeh laid it out a little clearly. Let's first get to one of the things about Africa, because I think it's something that many people are very concerned about. Many Africans are skeptical about this vaccine. And we have Nicole Francoise Bernard, who says it depends on the population, though. I live in Cameroon, where not so many people have been really sick. I'm not sure we in Cameroon really need that vaccine. So that goes back to the issue of the geopolitics, isn't it? Why is it malaria kills, very many more kids, isn't it? For a while, all of us, we survived malaria just because maybe we took some concoction, but we have not had a vaccine. And all of a sudden, COVID, that's a human need. That's a human reality. Is there any problem with that?
Well, so what's the question? Tell me the question again.
Is there any problem with the fact that there was a need in the Western world? They saw the need, their population dying, and so they invested their money in it. Africa, we don't have that. We have the need, we don't have the money. What is the problem? Why are people crying that this thing is just coming up because people in the West need it more than Africans?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I disagree with Ivo's contention about the politics and the geopolitics of it. Somewhere, somehow, we have to take care of ourselves. I'm talking about we Africans and Africa. You understand? I think things like this should make us start thinking the way we align ourselves with the global geopolitics. Personally, I believe we have the resources, we have the knowledge, we have the manpower to create our own startups and do what we need to do in order to survive for ourselves. We have it. We have the knowledge. We have the resources. So we don't always have to follow what the West is doing. We have to do what we need to do to survive in our continent. So at this moment in time, I think Africa or Latin America or some countries in Asia should not focus on what is happening in the Western world to relate that to their own reality. As Dr. Francois just indicated, it's not a problem in Cameroon, for example, as it is in America or even California. So the needs of Cameroon are totally different from the needs of Los Angeles, California. So your aspirations, your purpose is based on your needs. Right now, the needs of Cameroon are totally different from the needs of California. So Cameroon has to do something else than what California is doing. So the geopolitics is there, but we have to make sure we do what is needed. It's not a need in Cameroon as it is in the United States. So Cameroon cannot do what the United States is doing. Now, coming to the economics of it, drug development is very, very expensive. We're not necessarily saying the vaccines are not a drug, but they are. The process of approving the vaccines is very, very similar to the process of approving drugs, going through the phase 1, 2, 3, and even 4. So, as I said, it's very expensive. You have those financial connotations Ivo talked about. You always have dark things taking place when money is involved. We say in America, if you want to just follow the money, then you will get to the crime. So you always have those things taking place in the background. But at the end of the day, what is the alternative?
I think that's a great that's a great question for you, Dr. Azeh. Let me hear what would be the alternative.
Well, first of all, hi, Dr. Nicole Francois Bernard. Thank you for the question and actually for your opinion. I'm totally for what you said, and actually Dr. Chi actually also said the same. And I think at every time it's always a need assessment. You have to assess the needs of your population and you decide on that. And I believe that in many areas in the world, the needs, the medical needs are totally different, and COVID is not an issue in many areas in the world. So the resources have to be based on the needs of the people. So it's not only of the general population, but even as a physician, every individual patient has a different need based on his risk and the things on his medical history. So the question is, so if we are talking about what is the alternative, maybe we have to look at the data. So we are looking at an infection and we have a pandemic. And the interesting thing is that we are talking about anything, but we are not talking about death, about people dying. Of course, it is really horrible for any person to die of an infection that maybe we can control. That's not the issue. It is sad for somebody to die of whatever the cause. It's heartbreaking for every physician to lose somebody. But at the end of the day, we're talking about the fear that is in the society, is the fear that people will die. So if we are looking now at fatality and mortality in societies, how many people normally die in Germany and in most societies? You have a mortality rate of 1% a year. 1% of the population dies. And since this pandemic started, we have in March and April in most countries, you had an increase in mortality and then it dropped. But if you look at it annually, and even 2017, 2018, 2020, it's just a slight increase. So, I mean, to put it in figures, like in the US with a population of 330 million, 550,000 people, 55,000 people die a week, with their normal mortality issues. So if you are looking into that and say, okay, how many of these people actually died with COVID and not of COVID, is something that we don't have the data on.
Yeah, can you, sorry, hold your thought. Can you clarify that people died with COVID or not of COVID? Did I get that? What does that mean?
Yeah, that means that you do a test on somebody, maybe who died or who was in the intensive care unit, and the test is positive. But it's not because of the COVID that the person died. It's maybe he died because he had maybe cardiovascular issues, heart problems or chronic bronchitis, So it was not the COVID illness. It was not the SARS, the severe respiratory tract infection that caused his death. But he was just positive because many people are infected.
That's an interesting proposition, because I think that the conspiracy theories people are going to run with that, because again, I think part of the issue has been that many people think that the numbers here have just been inflated in terms of actually people are not dying from COVID. Everything is now just being lumped in COVID everywhere. Everywhere we are tired of COVID. But I get your point, which is what are the numbers, isn't it? Fatality, mortality rate throughout every year. How has it changed because of COVID? And I think what you're saying is that not necessarily, you know. So even if we did
to correct, actually, in the weeks, in the second and third weeks of March in the US, even in Germany in April, there was an increase in mortality, in the general population mortality. Hello?
Yeah, we are there. We are getting you.
Yeah. So, but if you look at the long-term data, so if we go back, even in Germany, 2 years ago, 2018, they had a severe influenza, and that was the mortality was higher, but in February. So you had in February a really high mortality where about 25,000 people died in Germany that year. At the moment in Germany, we have 18,000 people who have died. So I'm not downplaying anything. I'm not downplaying anything. I'm just like, if you go into the mortality tables of the countries and then you just have a glance, 2018, 19, 20, and so far, you have months where they were higher. But if you look at the general mortality, you realize that just without knowing COVID, you will say that, okay, well, these are just normal changes like in the other years. So the really degree of how many people have died during this pandemic is totally different from what we are really getting most of the time. So when we're talking about really people that have died of COVID, we don't really have a lot of good data on that. But if you look at the overall mortality in many countries, in Germany, every month about 886 or 75,000 people die. And since all the months within the last 3 years, we are within that fraction. So also, it's something. I'm not downplaying anything. People have died, people have lost their life for this, and we have to carry measures. We have to do things for people that are at risk of dying. But 1% of the population in most countries, they die every year.
So back to the vaccine itself. Thank you very much. You're on the Lambom Show, listening to Dr. Ivo Azeh and Dr. Chi-Kekah all the way in California. Dr. Ivo is in Germany. Now, Vicky says, my scare is that I hope they don't make it mandatory for everyone to take. Vicky is based in the US. What do you think, Doctor?
You see, it's a mixed bag. I think you see, like the regular vaccines, right? It becomes mandatory based on some of the things you have to do. I mean, if you have to go to school, for example, there's no way possible that you can go there without taking certain vaccines. I mean, it really becomes a problem. So I think it might be mandatory in certain spheres. You understand? In certain spheres, it might be mandatory if you have to go into a government building, if you have to go into a school. I think some of it is going to be mandatory based on some of the things you have to do.
So, I mean, let me play devil's advocate here. So, I mean, is that problematic in terms of the fact that your initial point was for the sake of the herd immunity, isn't it? Yeah. Let's just do it so that we get down the numbers, the infection levels, and there's it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a problematic, because on the one hand you don't know the long-term safety results, like Dr. Ivo has been saying here. Yet we need to bring down the numbers, and so what would you advise? I mean, what would you say to somebody who has this doubt? Again, in the United States, it's all about freedom, isn't it? My freedom.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you advise somebody who has that mindset that a mandatory vaccination is not something that curtails your freedom? Or if you are on the other side, what would you say?
It's very difficult, very, very difficult. It's really it's a very, very hard nut to crack. Freedom, you cannot force somebody to get a vaccine, but you can prevent somebody from doing something that the person would like to do if the person chooses not to get a vaccine. You understand? You might want to go to a movie theater. You have the freedom not to take the vaccine, but then the owner of the movie theater will also might mandate it that if you don't have the vaccine, you cannot come to the movie theater, for example. So it's kind of like a public health concern. And as you know, from a public health perspective, even though it's something which has not been very, very obvious in the pandemic cycle in the United States, Ivo will know that very well. You have this, the public health has a lot of power, which can really, really reduce your freedom. If you have an infectious disease like tuberculosis in Germany, for example, which I know very well, and you say you don't want to take the treatment, your freedom could be totally restricted. And I think it's the same thing here. So it's a totally mixed bag. You have that freedom not to take it, but on the other hand, you cannot exercise 100% freedom when you don't take it. So that's how it is.
Yeah, I find the topic on the mandatory issues in the Western world very interesting. You know, we are primed as individuals to think most of the time about our freedom. You know, it's about me and you, and that is really correct. But every time we have our personal interest, then I mean, we then decide differently. So we have the example of yellow fever. A vaccine being mandatory in certain countries when you have to travel. It had never been an issue. Anybody who wanted to visit a country on holidays just go and get the vaccine and goes up, you know. But that we should remember that was a mandatory vaccination. If you had to leave certain countries or you go there, but it had never been an issue on discussion. Of course, it's the third world country, you know. The third world country. So I mean, even in Germany, in their statute, the national statute is they say Recht auf Unversehrtheit des Körpers. I mean, I'm saying in Germany, it means that actually everybody has a right. So, and injecting somebody with a vaccine, actually, you're invading their personal body and right. You know, so I don't know how they're going to mix that, but of course, as Dr. Sanger said, when it comes to public health, you know, some of these rights have to be reduced. But okay, let's go back to the data and the science. So if you're vaccinating somebody and you're making it mandatory, you have to make it mandatory because that person poses a risk not only to itself. So everybody is free to pose a risk to himself. You know, you're smoking, you're risking yourself, you do this. I mean, that's your freedom. So if you are actually posing a risk to other people who are passive, it means that you're transmitting an infection to other people who are at risk. We might think of making it compulsory. But at the current moment, we don't know if any vaccine will stop you from transmitting COVID. So you can't decide on that, on the current data, to make it mandatory, because you may be stopping infection, people getting seriously sick, but all of them are transmitting it. So it doesn't, that's not the goal. The goal should be making things mandatory when the people are not vectors, you know. So so long as a vector is somebody that can carry a transmission from one other person to the other, you know. So if you happen to walk somewhere or get in contact with people that maybe are vulnerable and you're not vaccinated, maybe you get the COVID, you are not aware of it, you don't fall sick, but then you transmit it to others. So if you have a vaccine that stops that, we could think in public health terms of making that mandatory, but we don't have that data at the moment. The BioNTech and the Pfizer vaccine does not give us that data. So that question is simple. If we are having other data on that, then public health authorities can think about that issue.
So the other thing,
and just to add again on mandatory issues, even the data at the moment, the BioNTech Pfizer data is only approved for people above 16. You know, so we already have a huge population that are not going to be vaccinated with this vaccine. So we are waiting for other types of vaccine. Actually, you know, most of the politicians are not saying that. And then we have people with maybe certain conditions, autoimmune infections. We have people, the issue about pregnancy and people wanting to become pregnant is also an issue, and it's also in the label, in the leaflet of the vaccine, that they might think of not getting vaccinated. So, you know, there are many holes for people not to become vaccinated at the moment with the current vaccine.
Yeah, since you mentioned something about immunity there, Rachel had asked earlier on, Rachel Halle, are these vaccines safe for people with low immunity? And I think Vicky also asked something. Does anyone know how long the immunity lasts after taking the full dose of the vaccine?
Yeah, with regards to the length of the immunity, no. Nobody knows for sure. It certainly gives you something at least for 6 months, but there's no information on how long it's going to last. It's very possible that at least in the initial years, you might have to have repeat vaccines, like every year at least. But if I heard very well from what Dr. Fauci said a couple of days ago, probably 1 year, but not more than that. For somebody with a weakened immune system, generally vaccines are. I'm not so sure you can you get a vaccine if you have a weakened medically. If it makes sense to have a vaccine if you have a medically weakened immune system, it might. It's something that you would have to discuss with your primary care provider to see if exactly it's something that's good for you. But there are some serious questions there.
Maybe to add on the issue of the immune system, well, despite my reservations, I say that this vaccine is it's, you know, a huge step for mankind. The technology and even the efficacy also, it is it's more efficacious than many of the other vaccines on the previous technology. So even we have two types of immune system. You have the antibody, and then you have the cell-mediated immune system. And the mRNA technology actually elicites both system. You know, the traditional antibodies, most of the time they develop antibodies. You know, the antibodies are like proteins that grab on these foreign particles. But then you have the other cells, the T cells, that actually are really robust, and so you have both systems actually being stimulated. So these vaccines are actually more efficacious than the previous type of vaccines, you know. So maybe those even who are having problems with one part of their immune system, they have the chance that the other part of the immune system gets stimulated also and provide some form of a defense also. So it's an interesting and a really good technology, but we should not rush things. You know, we need.
So more questions, Governor Itush. I'll take the vaccine, for I believe in science and not fiction. Manford Justice, I differ with Itush. What science are you talking about? This COVID-19 is man-made to drive the agenda, and that brings me to something that Manford said before. Bill and Melinda Gates said we should test it first on Africans. So again, we have talked about the money, isn't it? We talked about the money factor there, and now the part of the controversy, many people think that vaccines are meant to depopulate Africa. We two things. Are we just guinea pigs, and should the Africans be really worried about this vaccine?
Yeah, Africans should be worried about everything. Yeah, but and Africans are not guinea pigs. And right now, once again, we go back to the needs. As is it a need in Africa? If it's not a need, then there's no need to carry out vaccination campaigns about this in Africa. I don't know if there was something else that I missed, but I don't think. You remember, Lambert, let me come back to something. When we were in high school, probably, there was a time that there was a vaccine. I don't know if it was a rubella, and the campaign was not done properly. And at the time, I think the SDF had just been launched. And I think initially they vaccinated some girls in in some of those government boarding schools, I think Bambili and GBHS Bamenda. And there was this huge outcry that the government was trying to reduce the population of the Anglophones. And that was the end of that vaccination campaign, because all the parents came and got their girls from schools, and nothing happened. So when you talk about public health interventions in the forms of vaccines, you really, really need a significant amount of buy-in from the population. The campaign has to be done properly. The information has to be done properly. People have to be informed. You have to alleviate the fears. You have to answer their questions. So Dr. Azeh has all these questions. They are legitimate questions. You don't have any information about long-term safety, but in terms of short-term safety, we know that the vaccines are safe. But on the long-term aspect of it, we don't have that information. So it's answer all the questions, present the data, present the full data, so that people are sure about what's going to happen. Because if people are not confident that the vaccine is good for them, they will not take it. Once again, personally, I repeat, I don't think it's a need for Africa. So it's not a big problem there. So they should approach it in a different way than we are doing in the United States.
Dr. Azeh?
Safety issue, it is interesting, we know that like we look at HIV, and we know that African countries have a high burden of HIV. And for HIV patients, RNA vaccines pose a problem. You know that the HIV virus is a RNA virus, so it's just like a lipid, and it's just like the vaccine. So what happens is the HIV virus has a special enzyme, which they call reverse transcriptase. So it can program the translation of the RNA into a DNA, and that gets incorporated into the cell, into the nucleus. So it's something at the moment that we don't know if an mRNA vaccine can be given to people who have HIV because they have this virus, So that's one of the safety concerns. I don't have much information about, and I don't want to scare people, but that's something that, and in most of the tests, HIV patients were not enrolled in the test because of that issue. So those are one of the safety issues. But of course, if I look also going back to the whole issue about vaccination in Africa, if I look my childhood, I mean, we were vaccinated with, it was even one injection, it was a pump, So, I mean, whatever person had an agenda, they would have carried it also through at that time. But we are here, we are living, all of us here, we went through that process. I don't know, you remember in the school, most of the schools, all the children came out in the fields and they were vaccinated. So we are still maybe products of a program. But that doesn't, I'm just only interested that African countries, maybe they should have their rigid public health issues and address their own problems, and not every time, every vaccination and everything has been donated by one foundation and this and that, so it's really a dilemma that people are in.
I mean, I'm very concerned about the rhetoric or literature around the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because many people seem to think that, again, based on the conversations we have had thus far, there's a monetary part to it, isn't it? How comes a billionaire is so concerned about the world that he'll be pouring money into a search for a vaccine, especially within the context of the fact that Bill Gates gave an address a couple of years ago that predicted what was going to happen. And you find that many people are now jumping onto that to say, oh, so Bill Gates was able to identify that there was going to be a pandemic, and the pandemic came out, and therefore, because of that, he's trying to put in money and all. I mean, the controversies. What would you say to somebody who is so skeptical of the vaccine because Gates predicted and is a billionaire?
So we are getting out of facts and out of science.
you already see, for example, I mean, Dr. Chi just said here that he's going to take the vaccine, isn't it? For me, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
Dr. Azeh, you said with the correct one, because you are a vector, you're going to take it. That's reassuring. I'm just asking for the sake of the people who keep saying, because the reason why people are not taking this vaccine is not because the skepticism is more about the people who are engaged in the development of the vaccine. Everybody is like, Gates, and we had this conversation yesterday. If Bill Gates had not said anything, put his money in and said nothing, I'm sure many people would have been more receptive to this. But when you have him going out and postulating and doing all, it becomes I think he's undermining his own message, maybe just because people have a certain bias. But all I'm saying here is, as medical doctors, I mean, how do you, let me phrase it this way. In the face of this pandemic, the other pandemic that you have is what has been called the infodemic, isn't it? Many things have come in and people are like, okay, how do we combat that in terms of letting people just look at the science? Because that's all we are saying. How do we just look at science?
It's really an unfortunate situation. I mean, as you rightly say, we have an infodemic. You understand? I mean, social media and mass media can make wonders so much so that we can sit and exchange and educate ourselves right now. I mean, this was not possible 20 years ago. 20 years ago, in fact, we just had the internet. 30 years ago, there was no internet. So what I can say is that, I mean, Bill Gates is a very, very wealthy person. Sometimes he talks, he says things that probably he shouldn't have said. If I'm not wrong, probably like 4 years ago, toward the end of the Obama presidency, he also mentioned something which was kind of like a foretelling on probably something like a coronavirus. I mean, he said an airborne infection, an infection that can be transmitted by means of airborne particles, is going to be the next kind of like global challenge. So and he actually prepared something which he gave the Trump administration. So many people have seen it. It's not just Bill Gates with the money that he has. Many people have known that if you had an infection which could be transmitted through airborne particles, like the coronavirus right now, it would put a lot of pressure on the healthcare infrastructure and public health system. So Bill Gates just happened to be the person who has a lot of money amongst most of those people. And generally, the world as it is, we are always very, very, we always have a very, very negative attitude toward people who have a lot of money and people who do things like Bill Gates does. But I see him more as a philanthropist. I mean, as we go back in the world 100 years ago, people have always made those statements, but most of them were not very, very heavy on the wealth aspect like Bill Gates. So I'm not so worried about what he said. People should educate themselves, read as much as possible, and get the information, talk to their primary care healthcare providers, and get the relevant information and do what's best for them and their communities. Community being very, very important, because once again, I am a proponent for people having the vaccination, because it's not just about you, it's about your community.
Dr. Azeh?
Actually, I don't really follow most of that discussion, so I can't really say a lot about Bill Gates and his programs and what he's following. I know that a lot of things that have been funded by the WHO is through the Bill Gates and Amanda Gates Foundation. Well, for me, when I look at the virus, so it's not really a new virus that is affecting the world. So the coronavirus, you have the SARS-CoV-1 in 2002. You had the MERS virus in 2008 in the Middle East, and both of them they had a higher fatality. And so now, 20 years after, we are having SARS-CoV-1. So it's more, for me, it has scientifically more something to do with the evolution of viruses. So from that, actually, I can have some information. But even if, I mean, human beings can manufacture viruses in laboratories nowadays, I believe that also. But I don't really have the information on such a program, and I don't really follow that information. But if I look at the evolution of things, 2002 COV1, and then 2009, and now this, so it fits into the evolution of things. On the other hand, what maybe evolutionary, let me say, in the evolution of things, we have been having pandemics, and sometimes pandemics are even necessary. I used to say that maybe pandemics, they correct the evolution of things, they correct our behavior, they correct technology. So even the pandemic is changing the technology of things and how things will manifest themselves. If somebody is behind that, okay, I don't know. But fact is, it's not just something that we want to introduce something in people. It is changing also the behavior of the whole economic of things, the way we behave, the way we act. So we should be adopting. Human beings are adopting new technologies. Maybe in future we are having more a decentralized form of economy and blockchain technology coming in. Maybe there are people might want to control human beings in another way. So these things are legitimate thoughts, and I believe that it is also people who think different, try to ask things from another angle that enrich our knowledge. But if as a clinician and you actually have patients who are infected and suffering, you have to treat them. It's not like okay, the conspiracy is something else, but you have this patient, you have to find a solution for them. And my life is based on people who are around me. The whole global aspect of looking at things and talking about them is not really my kind of approach in life. I'm more like a ground-based person, looking at the people around me and what to do for them.
So that's interesting because I think if it works for you, it should be able to work for others. But that's a conversation that we can take down the road. Let's get to Edward Ake's question. What are the risks and benefits for those who have already tested positive for the virus to take the COVID-19 vaccine? So if you already have it, or maybe you had it, should you take the vaccine or not?
You see, if you had it, we've heard that some people have had it twice, right? So it's possible that the immunity that you gained as a result of going through the condition might wane. You will probably not have it for the rest of your life. Definitely not for the rest of your life. So I know that there have been some studies where they test like the immunity in those who have gone through the virus. So it's not something that the average healthcare system is going to do, but I know that people have done that within the auspices of clinical trials. So we don't know how long that immunity lasts, but we know for sure that at some point it might wane, but not for everybody. So generally, the approach is that, or what is being discussed right now, it's still evolving. What's being discussed right now is that even those who have never had it, when you have the vaccine, you're going to get immunity, which could be like the immunity in somebody who went through it. And the recommendation right now is that it will not be a one-time issue. So I would think that somebody who has had it, at some point that immunity is going to wane. And at that time, you will probably need a vaccine.
I think there is some data from a population in one Brazilian town, which I don't know how they call it, Canaan or something. They have a very high they had a very high infection rate and even mortality, and there have been documented reinfections. And maybe just to add, there are also maybe some data that there are two serotypes of coronaviruses, L and S form. The L form being the more aggressive, and that's what is coming in at the moment. And we know also that when the whole pandemic started, that the virulence, the mortality was even higher than at the moment. So it seems that the mutation is undergoing the virus is undergoing some mutations and changes also. So maybe if we look at like influenza also, that is always changing. Probably we might have the same issue to do with the coronavirus. But at the moment we don't really have that data. But from my knowledge at the moment, it seems that people might have to, those that have been infected might really have to be vaccinated again, although we don't even know how long the vaccine will last.
Yeah.
So let me take, I know both of you are not ethicists, but let me take a question from a priest classmate of mine who is based in Rome, Father Joseph Dufay. He says, are vaccines produced from electively aborted fetuses? If so, what have we to say? And number two, what is the place of the consent of those made to receive the vaccination?
No, from what I know right now is that that's not the case. I know that there was something circulating around indicating that that was what happened, and I think we had that in the forum. But to the best of my knowledge, they are not created from electively aborted fetuses. If that were the case, that would be a huge concern from an ethical standpoint for many people, including myself. So. And what was the second part of the question again?
It was about the consent of those who will be made to vaccination made mandatory. What about the consent of the people who?
Yeah, so that second aspect of the question is linked to the first one. I don't think that's the case. That's not something that I think happened. We know for sure how the vaccines were created, but it has nothing to do with fetuses.
Dr. Azeh?
Well, science and using pluripotent cells from fetuses has its own history also. And there have been a lot of things that have been going that we are not aware of and that are not been approved. So we have an area in science that is covered in the background, and sometimes people are not really being informed of that. But it is something that has happened. It's something that has happened to you need cell lines to grow certain viruses, to do certain recombinant technology, and they have been using cells from fetuses, from yeast cells, from tumor cells. So human beings have been trying a lot. But in many countries, these examinations have not been approved. And then for things like illegally acquired things, so it's something that is really but in the dark underground, and we know that there are some crazy scientists doing that. But on the other hand, also it is the advantage of the new technology, because the new technology offers possibilities to produce. We don't need to grow viruses, to use recombinant technology. They just produce the RNAs, in reaction, and use a platform and can switch that. So I think we are moving away from that technology.
Yeah, and again, there was a question, I think we addressed it, but maybe come back to it, about the vaccines changing the DNA of people. I mean, is it true that this vaccine affects the DNA structures?
Well, for me, we don't know, and it's a risk, and that is a risk that many scientists have actually commented, and that's why actually many companies have their reservation in developing DNA vaccine, because it's introducing a DNA into the cell, into the nucleus of a cell. I mean that it will be degraded. But what happens if it's not degraded? Life is not always, as we always think. People have infections, people have other kinds of illnesses, and things certainly change over time. And we don't know how long this DNA will be in the cell's nucleus. So these are really safety issues, especially for the DNA vaccine. Although the DNA vaccine is logistically better, but I feel that that vaccine is not yet ripe for use, because introducing DNA is even a higher risk level, which we must really address and do observational trials to see how safe it is.
So, I mean, Doc, just for the sake, so what kind of changes could there be in the DNA? What kind of changes are anticipated that this DNA, what is the danger? Is it going to change us into chimpanzees or change us into to what? What difference does it make? Dr. Azeh, did you hear me?
Okay, yeah. Well, DNA is a piece of information, and with that piece of information, you can use that information to do anything. You can, okay, let me say, for example, in cancer, we had there was an interesting case that was published in the US, that somebody was diagnosed, of lymphoma, and they had high dose chemotherapy, and somebody made a donor of the stem cells, so you're transmitting stem cells of a healthy individual, but apparently in the donor, the donor had an illness, that was not manifested, and the recipient and the donor developed almost in the same month that illness, or that another form of a cancer, so it like reveals that, okay, in DNAs you have things that are like time bombs also, that get manifested. I mean, I don't want to elicit fear among people, but it's just like DNA is information, it's coded information, and it gets translated at certain times. So with DNA, you can actually, so if you look at it's just, the most interesting thing is like viruses, viruses that get into your computer, and they change information. Nowadays, we have viruses. When we're young, viruses they come into your system, and your system just crashes. But viruses come into your computer nowadays, and they monitor everything, get some piece of information, changes things, and all the likes, So the same RNA is just the information for the proteins, but it actually changes your cells. But DNA is the center, is the control center, actually. So you can actually slip in information. But the thing is that, it is scary, but it is a useful technology that we have to develop. So we have people with genetic illnesses, and these people need treatment. So the technology is brilliant. It is a brilliant technology, but we must know how to handle it. So people who are born with genetic illnesses, we look at in Africa, sickle cell, so we're talking about gene therapy, which is the next evolution in types of therapy. So, but we have to develop this technology, we have to monitor it, we have to know the side effects.
Just let me add a little bit to what Dr. Azeh just said. Obviously, with any kind of like therapy, think for example, you have an accident and you're having a blood transfusion in Bamina, right? From the blood bank, right? You are getting all sorts of things in your body. You are getting red blood cells, you are getting, even DNA and all whatnot. So all I'm saying is that the important thing is that things need to be cleaned up, right? The technology and the whole science around it needs to get better, so that people should get the right information and be comfortable about doing whatever they need to do in order to stay safe as far as vaccines are concerned. However, you understand, the regulatory authorities, right, they have to make sure that they do their job properly. Make sure the efficacy is very, very clear and things are cleaned up so that people should get as much information as possible. We are evolving, and the medical technology is taking steps, leaps and bounds forward, and we are not going to evolve simply because some people are doing some things. You understand what I mean? And people are always doing those things. I always ask the question, right? What is the alternative, right? Are we not going to progress because we want to be perfect? Are we going to let perfection be the enemy of progress? Not everything is going to be perfect. There are going to be some mistakes along the way. We as human beings, our body is not even perfect. There are mistakes that the body catches and fixes. You understand? So from a population perspective, you can give a vaccine to people, bad things might happen to a few people, but the end game, the end result is that the population progresses, right? Mankind progresses, but some few people might suffer as a result of it. But as a whole, you will make a leap forward. So I see it very much in that light. It's population medicine, it's not individual medicine.
That's, in fact, I could close the show now because that's a very important point for anybody who is anti-vaccine, whatever. The point Dr. Chi just made there is very, very important. Very important, isn't it? What is the alternative? Let the perfect not be the enemy of the good, isn't it? Let's try it. Definitely some people are going to, again, that's just life. Okay, it's not going to work. Dr. Azeh said it before. Everything is not going to be 100%. Life does not go in a straight line, isn't it? It's not a linear thing. We go around in circles. But again, even to your point, Dr. Azeh, when we're talking about this gene editing thing, I mean, there's something new that just came up. The Nobel Prize winners for chemistry this year, they came up with something about gene editing tool, isn't it? So again, definitely you are going to have something that is related to the DNA. The problem is we don't know what. And as a result of that doubt, people are now going to just say, oh, because I doubt this, therefore it is bad. And I think it's a wrong conclusion to come up that way in terms of where we are. We all have suffered for the last 10, 11 months with this COVID-19. And I believe that a little bit, whatever progress that has been made, always being cautious. And that's the caution you're putting in terms of what is the long-term effect? Because at the same time, we could talk about Dr. Senge's thing and say, well, you are saying there could be some effects. You could have actually everybody wiped out as a result of that, isn't it? We don't know. We just do not know. But then, so my question to you, Dr. Azeh, is this. Even though you have the possibility of the alterations in the genes, in the DNA and all that, isn't it worthwhile just to have at least a little bit of progress so that we can now see how far we have come and how far we can take this? And maybe I just get into the thing that we were talking about earlier on. Definitely, I mean, people talk about privacy. Our whole lives are already public information. So when you keep saying that, the famous thing about Bill Gates, which I wanted to mention earlier on, is they say that you are going to have some microchip put into you to make sure that you have been vaccinated and your information is everywhere. I find that ludicrous, but what do you have to say?
Well, maybe to add, I mean, what Dr. Senge said is perfectly correct, but as humans, I believe that there are certain corrections we have to make. There are certain alternatives that we have to do as concerns progress. There are certain institutions and mechanisms that are lacking. So at the moment, developing vaccines, medications is totally carried. So the person that develops the vaccine carries out the clinical trial and come and present you the information, and they say an independent body evaluates that. Research from universities has been hijacked. When it reaches a profiting level, It is hijacked from universities. You have startups, pharmaceutical companies, they buy it. They run the clinical trials that are negative, but maybe for the information and side effects are useful, they are not being published. So we have a precarious situations where the person developing the product presents us the information also. The institutions that are doing the reimbursement just sit and wait. The pharmaceutical company, they have their lobby, which has infiltrated the public, and certain things that is really lacking in Europe and US, where most of these medications are being approved, is that we lack a control mechanism that is doing independent clinical trials. These independent clinical trials can be after approval, even just to monitor. Maybe these things about safety. So you understand, the person selling the product provides us the data. That is totally wrong. And that is something institutions in developed countries must change. You must have an independent body also that carries clinical trials on pertinent issues, or else, because if you go into the market, you find so many products of things that maybe are not useful, or maybe data is being hampered for that. And for me, that is something that has to be clarified. On the other part of your question about we are living in a transparent society, and data is here and there. I mean, Dr. Senge said, I mean, when you have an accident, you get blood transfusion. At the moment where our needs are being addressed, things changes, So if we're talking about, let's go into the area of population control, Even if they're doing population control, I just look at how many women are carrying the intrauterine device. I mean, it's a device. It has its complication, but hundreds of thousands of women in the world, they have it for population control. People are using the morbidity for using the pills. It's a huge problem, Those are already changes that are taking place, but we don't really address them, but we are taking them. So the intrauterine device is also something that is inserted in due to control birth, and people are doing it freely, and it's being recommended for a lot of African countries or women and all these things and that. And then the other issue is we are in the world now. If you're talking about injecting things into humans that they don't want, if you look at the augmented human, if you do an X-ray on most people, you find out that there is something. If you are looking at X-ray, most of the time you see somebody who has a hip joint, he has a heart. He had a heart valve, he has this and there. Most of our cancer patients, they have POTS. At the end of the day, so when I look back, I realized that, my God, so many people already have augmented devices in them. So it's just an issue if this device has a chip or not. I mean, I'm not propagating for chips, but I'm just saying that every time our needs are concerned, we get things injected into our system, and and that's it.
So we have been on for 2 hours more, and I think I hope that people have found it interesting. Before I ask the last words, Vicky says you guys should try it and let me know how it feels. Again, Dr. Senge has already said he's going to take the vaccine. Dr. Azeh says he's waiting for some other form. But again, for the sake of everybody, I think that has been quite. For me, I've learned a lot, and I hope that many people have also learned a lot. There are many more questions. Eddie, the idea of COVID-19 vaccine conspiracy might have been another elusive concept held by society, just like how the year 2000 was believed to be the end of the world. Well, again, there are many of these things. Anti-vaxxers, they are not new. This is not a new concept. Dr. Chi brought up the incident that we had in Cameroon in the 80s, where when again, that important message about how you streamline the message about vaccines is important. Because everybody now is afraid. There will always be one reason why people don't want it. For the sake of the audience, I really want to say thank you spending 2 hours with us. I want to say thank you, Dr. Azeh. I want to say thank you, Dr. Senge. I think that we'll come back We'll come back to it when I get more of it. But let me have your closing remarks, Dr. Chi.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. I've learned a few things, which of course is a foundation for me to educate myself. I mean, it's evolving. There's always new stuff coming up, so we are all learning. However, as I say, my question is, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? So I am looking forward to coming back on when we know a little bit more and when we must have had some experiences about the vaccine. With regards to Vicky, yeah, Vicky, I'm going to have the vaccine, and when I do, I will make sure you know what my experience was. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chi. And again, I really want to appreciate your time and all that you do in order to educate the community. In fact, one of the most important lessons you gave us today is what is the alternative. Gamale does not want us to go. He said, what is the projected cost for the COVID-19 vaccine? Is it going to be affordable for those in the third world? I think we virtually talked about something again about the third world today. We really thought it's not something that we really need to be worried about. But Dr. Azeh, you want to answer that before you say you give us your last remarks?
Well, I don't really know the cost of the Pfizer and BioNTech costs, but the logistic is intensive in cooling 80% minus 80 degrees. What I know is that the AstraZeneca, they said that they were not going to price the virus in to make benefits, but just to cover the research costs. So it seems like it's going to be cheaper, but it's also a vaccine that one will still have to wait for more information on the safety issues. Yeah. So I don't know the price actually but in the West and in US and here since the government is paying, so individuals don't really have any personal cost. Yeah.
Right, just before I come to your last comment, great job. Once more, science has been so enlightening. Victor Take, I trust in the makers of the vaccine. I'll go for it 100%. And our friend Vicky, you get that. So, Dr. Azeh,
yeah, I'm actually, thank you, Mr. Mbom, for this great opportunity and for the audience also. And it's been a great time with you, Dr. Senge, and we are reflecting. I think we are trying to be open-minded to look into what people are thinking, what are their thoughts, and how information is being transmitted. Science is enlightening, but as Mr. Mbom said, we have an issue of infodemic. And this issue of infodemic and conspiracy is not just something that started as a joke. I think that it has been fueled also by the current media because they have been actually playing a great role in disinforming individuals. So this is not something that started now, but if we are looking into the history of things, how economy functions, how terrorism functions, we realize that also the press has played a huge role to disinform people, to give people the false notion of how things are being done in the world or what is happening, and whereas there are certain economic agenda behind. And now we have an issue where people are really skeptical about maybe scientific issues, health issues that are good. And I think that the authorities have to think on how they are broadcasting information and also allowing other people to ask contradictory questions. So for me, generally, but for me, I think this virus for me is not really a great issue, but for me personally, I believe that this virus is an evolutionary step to, as I said, to reshape or to give us back another sense of humanity and change the course of evolution. And it has been happening constantly, and this is just the time. And it's not the time to do things fast, but it's the time to decelerate and do things slowly and reflect. So even having contrary opinions, thinking about conspiracy is just new. It's just things to foil on how we have to think about things. And I believe that after the crisis, yeah, we are going to have a greater leap and better times.
So again, thank you all very much. I want to thank my classmates, especially those who have been on the program, Cosmas, Ngamali all the way in South Africa, Ake in Boston, and the rest of the people who tuned into the show today. I hope you picked up one or two things. I remain very grateful, and I think it's an ongoing conversation. One of the things we learned is COVID-19 is evolving, to use Dr. Azeh's saying. Every day we learn something new. We all will continue striving to educate, to inform, to learn, to help each other to be able to manage this. The times are really hard. Different states in the United States are almost getting back to a lockdown because of the rates. But we all will continue striving to see what measures we can take. As usual, what has been prescribed for now is mask up, wear your mask. Very important, because again, while we are talking about vaccines today, some of us may not be able to take the vaccine if we want to until maybe sometime in April or May. So let's do basic things: mask up, social distancing. I've really never understood what social distancing is. I think it's physical distancing. And again, what else? Hand washing. Let's learn to do those three. And while the science of the vaccine will continue to study, I'm going to bring on these two doctors again. Once the vaccination start off in the United States and we start getting other results, we'll bring them back on to give us the state of affairs. Once more, thank you all. Great morning, great afternoon, great evening, and goodbye. Tomorrow, the Southern Cameroon's Medical Society is going to be having on this same platform a conversation about cryptocurrency. Medical doctors talking about cryptocurrency. So you can tune into this same platform tomorrow at 1 p.m. Until then, enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.